And so, with no more ado, it's with great pleasure that I introduce Suad Aldarra. She is Syrian. She was born in Saudi Arabia, and she now lives in Ireland. Suad's book, I Don't Want to Talk About Home, is subtitled A Migrant's Search for Belonging. And in the prologue, she describes home as the hole inside your soul that can't be filled by any other place. We follow her on her journeys, both inner and outer, through many not homes and would-be homes, until perhaps a home finally at the end. And as we do so, there's maybe an invitation to all of us to consider what home really means to each one of us as well. Roddy Doyle has called her story powerful, fascinating, and deeply moving. I'm sure you'll all agree. And with no more ado, hello, Suad, and welcome.
Hi, Anna, and thanks for having me today. It's such a pleasure to do this event with you.
Well, let's begin. And I feel with such an intricate life story as yours, let's start in the simplest place, right at the beginning. You were born in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, 1982, I think. You were the only daughter with two brothers. And like many Syrians at the time, your parents were working in Saudi Arabia. Your mother was a teacher and your father an accountant at a Saudi ministry. Can you tell us a little more what it was like growing up in Riyadh at that time? Tell us about your childhood.
Sure. So I was born in 1986, actually, and I had two brothers, and then later on I had a third brother after 10 years. Growing up back in the 80s in Saudi Arabia, I think it was a different country than what it is today. It was more conservative back then, and there was this sense of privacy around women, and that privacy that comes from shame. So everything around women would be like women were separated. The gender segregation was very vivid there. And you can see it everywhere in the streets, in the malls, in the schools, everywhere. And when I was a child, I didn't realize those things. And I was just like any normal child that I would want to play and run and ask questions all the time. And I remember my father when, I was very active, that my father, whenever he was asked, how many kids do you have? He would say I had two girls and a boy, referring to me as the boy because I was the loudest and the most curious and the one who would break things. And my brothers were like a bit shy or not as loud and disruptive as me. And that made me very happy. That was his way of complimenting me. And I never realized back then when I was a child, of course, that how offensive that compliment was, that it's a good thing to be a boy, but the bad thing is to be a girl. So I was this boy, kind of.
I think perhaps that's a real thread through your story, is your family relationships, particularly this turbulent relationship with your father, right from early childhood. And as you have said in your book, and to me, you are very similar in many ways to your father, your resilience, your determination, and as you said, my stubbornness. So that this was a clash really from childhood all the way through your life, and has been one of the themes which has perhaps driven you on through to your adult life.
That's true. Yeah, me and my father were alike. We both were strongly opinionated, and we wanted different things, and we were stubborn. If you use that word, we were stubborn, and my brothers would usually go along with the rules that he would put, but I would always question the rules, and I would want to break the rules, or but why is this and why is that? And as a child, I got away with those things, but once I became a woman, when I hit like 11, 12 years old, all of this changed, and I wasn't my father's favorite daughter anymore. Suddenly I became this woman, this responsibility, this liability that he has to protect in any way, and this person that the community around him would shame him if I've done anything wrong, or if I went out of the line, or even if I left. That was considered something terrible to do back then.
Yes,
So
of course.
that relationship became stressful then.
Your life changes as a girl, doesn't it? All the swimming, all the physical activities as a child suddenly stop, and you have to watch the boys and sit on the sidelines. But of course, you did go back to Damascus for your holidays, which was every year, which would have been a different place. Did you consider Riyadh your home, or was Damascus always your home?
Yeah, I knew that Saudi Arabia and Riyadh wasn't home, that I was a foreigner there. I learned that in a very random way. Nobody told me that I'm a foreigner. And then one day in school, like, they were taking the names and taking the statistics, and I realized that I was a foreigner. I wasn't considered not a local, I was a foreigner. And I knew when we went back home in the summer holidays to Syria that was home, that was where I belonged, where my parents belonged. And I noticed the difference between the two places, that Syria was more liberated. There was music on the streets. Women could go out. They didn't have to cover up, and they were more independent. So I felt more on ease back in Syria, and I felt that that's home. And so when I finished school in Saudi Arabia, I went to college in Syria to study software engineering at Damascus University. And that was also like another topic, like, why would a girl study engineering? That was another conversation. Like, I should have studied something easier or something more straightforward where I can get married easily. And that was the goal
I'm actually very interested in that in your book, because you have a lovely quote where you say, study English and get married, get a husband. And your family, again, you were breaking against tradition by studying what you studied. But as you said to me in conversation, it saved your life, as we shall see later on. Having worked in Damascus myself, you give a lovely image of the lady on the bus who was making notes on your marriageability. It sounds a happy time, a free time, a time in which you developed in many ways. And of course, that's where you met your future husband, Hossan.
That's true.
More about Damascus.
That's true. I felt I belonged there instantly when I moved to Damascus. So I moved in 2003, where I started studying at college, and I felt comfortable to be independent, that I was studying something that I loved. And I later on met a guy and fell in love. And ironically, he was called a refugee. And back then I wanted to put this image, the ironic image, that people usually always, whenever they hear someone from Syria, it's like they are a refugee. That's the first word that comes into their mind. But back then, Syria had refugees from other countries. So my husband's origins was from Palestine. His grandfather came to Syria in 1948, and he had my father-in-law, and then my husband. So 3 generations from Palestine. And my husband never saw Palestine, but he was still labeled as a refugee in Syria, and he was considered a second-degree citizen. And that sparked like a whole different conflict with me and my father, because why would his only daughter get married to someone called a refugee? And I wanted to approach that refugee topic and racism from another perspective, which I mentioned in the book, from this totally different story. But going back to Damascus, I wanted to paint that picture of Damascus and bring it back to life, to change that narrative that's always in the news, because Syria is always portrayed in the news as this destructive place. And like, it's when Syria is mentioned, there's like camps and boats and devastation and this black image, which exists, but that's not a full image. I wanted to bring that Syria back to life. And I'm happy always when everyone tells me that I managed to do that, when I get messages from people telling me about that picture. And I remember one day someone asked me, where are you from? And when I said from Syria, and he said, oh, I remember back in the days where people used to go to Syria for holidays. And I loved that comment more than anything, because I wanted to hold on to that old image that I have in my mind to Syria instead of this new one that's always portrayed in the news. So Syria was a lovely place for me, and I was happy and I was in love. And I graduated as a software engineer. I had my community, my network, my friends, until the events and the war happened in 2011.
Yes, indeed. No, it was. I understand. It was a wonderful ancient city, and to live there must have been a wonderful experience. Things started to change. You and Hossam decided to get married, and this again, it was complicated, as you have said, and it was not a traditional large Arab wedding. You had to show it to your mum on a laptop. Your family could not come. Your family, as you say, at this time, there was a view of looking down by Syrians on Palestinians, and you found your father's views to be racist. This was becoming a tough time because you were preparing a home, a flat to live in with your husband, and this would be your home. And it all began to disappear before your eyes. That must have been very painful. Your trip out of Damascus sounds very difficult, very chaotic, but you held it together. Can you tell us about how you left Damascus, how that was, Beirut and Cairo?
Yeah, so when the war started in 2011, we all thought that it will be just something that will go on for a few weeks, probably a few months, and then things will be over and we'll have a new president maybe, and things will be back in control. And that didn't happen, unfortunately, and things kept escalating. So after 2 years of that life in conflict, explosions, low resources, electricity cuts, the economy is falling, we took the hard decision to leave. And when we decided to leave, it was more complicated than we thought. And like I still remember when that's the first chapter actually of the book, that I wanted to write about the moment of leaving, because that was the hardest part. And that's where the opening of the book. It's when we are on our way to the airport, and we're in this car, and we packed our whole life in 2 suitcases. And then we get a call saying that the flight did not land because of conflict around the airport, and that we have to go back. So after packing everything and after taking that decision and after saying goodbye to everyone, and just as we were about to reach the airport, we were told to go back because it was too dangerous, that the airport is shut down. And that moment was just too devastating, because it was already hard to take that decision to leave. And then we told to go back. So we went back, and then we tried to find an alternative way to get out. So the only option was, the closest airport was through Beirut, Lebanon, which is 2 hours drive. So we do that, we switch our tickets and we go to Lebanon, but we get held on the borders. And there's a whole history there about the relation between Syria and Lebanon and why those delays happened. And after we managed to pass, then we missed our flight and we had to sleep a day in the airport. So it was this series of the city was pulling us back not to leave. And it was already hard enough to say goodbye, but then got all that complications in our way. But then we finally managed to escape and get a flight to Cairo, where we were planning on settling. And we thought that moment, I remember on the flight, I felt like that's a new start. That's where everything will be better. We left the worst behind us. But that's when things got even more complicated. And then another political complications happened in Egypt. And as we started to settle in, then all things changed again. And we Syrians weren't allowed to stay anymore in Egypt. Our visas were revoked, we couldn't renew our visas, and we became just illegals overnight. And we had to look for somewhere else to go. And that's where I realized how much the visa and the paper borders were choking us, and it was unfair, and there were new rules every day, and there were groups on Facebook, and we were always reading through them, like what's the country now that where we are allowed to go without a visa, or which country is issuing visas for Syrians or for Palestinians, because my husband had a different kind of passport. He had a refugee travel document, and that was even more complicated. So navigating through those visas process and finding a place where that would allow us to go. And that's the point, that's the point that I wanted to make, that it wasn't easy as people would think, like why they are illegal migrants, why they are coming here illegally. And that's the thing, there's no legal way to come to Europe or a safe place, because all the borders were shut down, and there was no way to go to an embassy and apply for a visa and go on a plane. It was complicated. So until then, so we were very close on taking that decision of the going on a boat, because we can't stay in Egypt, we can't go anywhere. But then luckily I managed to get a job offer. We were trying to apply for job offers all around the world. And that's where I think my engineering degree saved my life. It had this butterfly effect on my life. And I got a job offer in Ireland, the country of luck, that changed my life. And
this whole way of life must have been so exhausting. But as you say, your degree, in a way, saved your life. So then you got your amazing job offer. And you have a lovely, lovely image in your book of sitting in your kitchen in Cairo, or kitchenette really, with half of Hossam's family living with you in about 2 tiny rooms. And you're at your kitchen table on Zoom having an interview with Fujitsu in Galway. And waiting for the response, and you got the job. But again, I believe at the beginning Hossam couldn't come with you, so I mean, off you go on your own. Remarkable determination, and you go to Ireland. So tell us about that. Tell us about what it was like leaving Hossam there, moving on.
That was a hard decision to make, especially that we already been through that battle to choose each other and to be with each other and leave our family, leave home to be with each other. And then we were again in front of this crossroad. Shall we stay together in Egypt where we have no future and we are not allowed to stay, or one of us would take this jump and leap of faith and find a safe place for us? And he managed at some point to get a visa, but like he couldn't feel safe leaving me alone in Egypt. He felt safer that if I go to Ireland, and then he would figure things out. He knew that I'll be safer in Ireland. So he encouraged me to take that decision when his visa was rejected. And it was a very hard decision to move without him. But we agreed that we'll try this for 3 months. If it didn't work out, we'll just go back to Syria and we'll face whatever future we have there, but we'll be together. So we took this decision. I went to Ireland on my own, and I was in this new whole world on my own. And luckily, 3 months later, he managed to get a visa and join me. And that was like a whole new world, a new life for us.
Yes, indeed. And I think, again, you know, having left Cairo, where you I think you said something like, we didn't even buy a teapot because we didn't know if we would be there tomorrow. You actually now move from many not homes to more not homes. So here you are in Ireland. I believe you have a job that you like very much, but I believe Hossam does not have a job. Your first message to him is how green everything is. You can't believe how the colour of the green. Life in Ireland with Hossam was bright green, as you say, and eventually he came and you had a good job. And on you go in Ireland. All is looking very well in Ireland, it seems to me. Describe to us how you felt, the two of you, in Ireland.
Yeah, as you said, like it was green and people were nice and friendly. And Galway, it was a very peaceful place. I think we were lucky that that was our starting point in a very relaxed city, small city. And that helped us actually after all the stress that we've been through. And as you said, like we were always like back in Egypt, like we were not sure to buy a teapot or buy any small thing, that because we were leaving the next day, we weren't sure if we were staying in that apartment. So once we were in Ireland, we had that sense of starting to settle down, although there were also like complications with Sam's visa, or he wasn't allowed to work until he figured those things out. But I remember feeling that we can buy now teapots and plates and settle down with this new small flat that we have. And that sense, like, because it's not only about safety for migrants or refugees, it wasn't only about finding a safe place, but having that feeling to settle down and to make this place as home. So that's when we started to do that for the first couple of years before and we never acknowledged what we've been through. We always felt that we are safe. We didn't go in a boat. We didn't have to go through. We didn't sit in a camp. We were fine, and we kept denying that the trauma, the mental trauma that we've been through.
Yes, I think that the denial is one of the things you talk about later. That you kept moving.
Exactly, yeah. That's the survival skill that we had. Like, just keep moving, find a job, be busy, do many things in one time, and not think about what happened before or what you left behind.
Yes. And yet, I think in this, this is the first time that you are living outside a Muslim culture, and this must have been very different as well, celebrating New Year's Eve at McDonald's, I think, or something, as well as Ramadan. And this is the first time I believe that you actually take off your hijab. But of course, you can't tell your parents, you can't tell your family. There's all this going on at the same time. So you did start your writing at this time. You went on a creative writing course, which all seems to me as if you were bedding down for a life. But of course, this was not to be, because you, being your father's daughter, are always determined to do more. There must be more. And of course, you found more, didn't you? You were quite comfortable, but it was not to last, really, was it?
Yeah, that's true. So I was writing. I remember I had a notebook, and I would be working during working hours, and then one memory would just push on the surface. I don't know why. And then I would just open my notebook and start writing down that story. So I kept kind of very separated, disconnected stories, small parts of the journey that I had. And I wanted to write, but I didn't know that I would be writing my own story. I thought I would be writing fiction or like some random person story, but not my own story. I did this creative writing class as an escape from the stress of everything. Like, even work was stressful at some point. And I enjoyed having this 1 hour it was 2 hours, I think, every week, just to talk about writing, hear other stories, live in this world where nothing else matters, or there's it's this fiction world that I was living in and writing those stories. And I kept in denial for a while until I was in this event and I heard about the humanitarian work and how technology can be used in helping refugees. And that struck me, that my skills can be used for helping refugees. So far, I thought it was only about donations and being physically there to help the refugees. And that was in the peak of the refugee movement and the European border shutting down all the borders and all of that. So UNICEF was interested at that point to understand and be able to predict, using technology, the refugee on the move and how they can support them, where can they put checkpoints so they can provide support. And I approached them and I decided to volunteer with them. They were looking for someone technical and who also knows the language. So I started getting back to everything that I blocked behind. So before that, I stopped using Facebook. I stopped looking at anything related to back home, because I couldn't cope with reading all the news from back home. I had to cut ties and start a new life. But when I started volunteering with UNICEF, I went back to Facebook. I went back to the pages about refugees and like the smugglers and the routes that they would take, and all of those details, trying to analyze data there. And I think that's when I was faced with everything that I was in denial with. And that's when I learned that I am called a displaced person. Because so far I was like I always knew that I wasn't a refugee. I didn't apply for asylum, but I didn't know the term displaced, because I knew I felt vulnerable, but I wasn't sure why. And knowing that I'm displaced, like I'm disconnected from my family, I'm disconnected from my community, I can't go back home, I've been through war, I've been through that trauma, but I'm not a refugee. And I knew those terms, and I started feeling more and more vulnerable working with UNICEF on refugees related projects. And I took this chance. Like I got the Anna job offer to work officially on data science related projects, and it was in New York. But again, because of visa complications, I decided to work remotely and travel frequently to New York. And that life was very complicated.
And in your book, there's a very strong feeling of things are coming to a crunch, really, because it's not a sustainable life. And I guess, a lot of the time you must have felt you didn't know how to escape from this life. I don't know. It was.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know how to live a normal life. I thought that's my life will always be complicated, and I will always have challenges, and I will always have visa problems, and living between several cities and having to travel. And I didn't know how to live a normal life. I looked at my friends and colleagues who had a normal life, and I started feeling awkward that I'm this person who doesn't have a normal life, who doesn't know how to live a normal life. And that feeling that created kind of this barrier that I don't belong with any group that I'm with, because everyone around me was normal. I was the only one with a complicated history. And it was hard to talk through it or to explain to people. There was always a long dialogue that I would have to explain why I made certain decisions, or why do I have to travel between New York and Galway all the time. And it wasn't straightforward for people to understand my life. So that made me just withdraw and
yes, that's very evident. That's evident in your book. And of course, there are things going on again with your family. Your father is now diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and visas won't allow you to go back there. It seems never really stopping. And at one point you actually say, I didn't know who I was anymore. And I love this phrase, working remotely was not remotely working, until I think you actually end up passing out at some huge important Facebook conference in California, because it's all coming together. And then of course Donald Trump didn't help, did he?
Yeah, so the Trump infamous ban came into action while I was in New York, and overnight, active immediately, that he did this ban against 7 Muslim countries. It was called the Muslim ban, but so Syria was one of those countries that people from those countries weren't allowed to enter the US anymore. And Hossam was on a plane that day, the next day, to come to the US and be with me. And when I look back, to be honest, on those incidents, I can't believe how bad my luck was to be in Egypt during the military coup, and to be in the US during the Trump ban, and to even also before be in Syria during the war. So there were so many political unfortunate events that I survived, and they all just made my life more and more complicated. And life in New York was like, it gave me so many stories to tell, and opened so many doors and experiences, that I met so many interesting people there. but it was just too complicated. I wasn't in the right mindset to be
Right.
working
Of course
humanitarian
not. Of
or
course
to
not,
live
because
this kind of
yes,
life.
yes. All this stuff was coming up, and I think the culmination was for you when you discovered you were pregnant, and it's very sad, rather chillingly. You say at this point, I don't think Syrians should have babies because it your life didn't seem right to you, but.
That's true. I like, especially working with UNICEF, I was always around pictures of kids in the camps, and most of them were Syrians. And it's kind of related. Like, if I have a kid, then he will be in a camp, or will I be able to protect him from being a refugee or from being displaced? Will I be able to explain to him or her like this life that I've been through? And I was just not feeling healthy enough to be a mother. Will I be able to love this baby? And it was a very scary and lonely decision on top of everything that I've been through. So many questions, so many decisions. Will I be able to do it on my own? Will I be able to love this baby when I never exactly had a good relationship with my parents? So that didn't help. I think when I got pregnant, that was the peak of my, like, I there was no denial anymore. I was hitting the bottom, and I had to be better if I wanted to be a mother. I think
to pull it all together at the end here is to, that you stopped working with New York, in part, in a strange way. You were a beneficiary of COVID, because you could no longer do this. So all this came to an end. You were in Ireland, you were pregnant, and you have stayed there since. And in the middle, being Suad, in the middle of this, you decide to take on an MA, which you get a first for.
I didn't end my work directly. Like, at some point, I was working full time still with UNICEF, and I had my baby, and I was doing a part-time master's, and that's how much I was pushing myself to be busy, to not process anything. Like, I was doing 3 things that are already hard separately, and I was doing them all together because I didn't want to process my feeling. But then when I took the decision to quit my job and focus on my kid and my master's, and then I finished my master's, that's when it hit that I wasn't busy anymore. I had to think of all the things that I went through.
And you were forced.
Yes.
And you did. And then it all began to come together. You began writing again. And to just you went to a therapist, and she asked you to write down a sentence over and over again. And what was that sentence that she asked you?
Well, she didn't ask me to write, actually. She gave me this sheet to like write about my feelings, like to be aware of what I'm feeling every hour or whenever. Like, if you feel sad, just write it down that at 10 o'clock I felt this because I was remembering this. And I didn't like this way of talking about my feeling and put it in boxes and put it in Excel sheet. And I just didn't do that. And instead I found myself writing and remembering those stories and unblocking my memory. So I went to this cafe and I wrote the sentence, "I don't want to talk about home," because I didn't want to go to therapy and talk about home with her, but I wanted to write it down. And that's what I did. And that's what worked for me, sitting down. And I remember, like, I would put my kid to sleep and stay overnight from, I think, 8 p.m. till midnight. I wanted that uninterrupted time. I would sit down, close the door, and just write and cry and put it all out there. And that's what helped me. And that's how the book was born. And I feel so much relieved and better after it. I know after all those terrible stories, writing this book really helped me. It freed me. I feel comfortable now in my own skin.
You seem it and you sound it, and that's really lovely. And
that's good to hear, yeah.
And you now have Irish citizenship, and there's a lovely to tie it up. There's a lovely sentence at the end of your book, in which you say, "As long as we are together, we are at home." And I think for all of us, as well as you, this notion of home, of what it means to us is so important. And for you to have found something through all your experiences, and because of your determination to survive and more than survive, you have a remarkable achievement in your life and your book. So I'm sure you will go on.
Thank you.
This is not the end. Knowing Suad, it will be going on to further things. So thank you very much indeed, Suad. And if any questions now, please put in the question and answer box, and I will read them.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, it's been a tough journey, but yeah, the book, The Irish Citizenship, really freed me from all those unfair situations that I was in, and being able to have that voice and to change the narrative, and getting messages from people telling me that I'm writing their story and that I'm being their voice. That's such a privilege that I'm really grateful that I managed to do that.
One question is asking, have you found communicating with other refugees, because you have many friends throughout your book, of similarities in experience, of this sense of denial?
I don't have similar. Haven't found someone with very similar path, the one that I took. Like I know some Syrians here who came to Ireland before the war, so they came here to study and everything was fine and they could go back and forth home. And then the war happened, but they were already settled in Ireland and they were already familiar with Ireland. They weren't forced to come here. And the other kind would be the people who came here as refugees, and they through resettling programs from Greece, for example, or from Lebanon. So they went through that refugee complicated route. I haven't met anyone who came after war through a job offer, for example. So yeah, my case was kind of complicated. But when I speak to people, they are either they don't like they are fine, like they settled in before the war and they moved on, or it's people who've been through so more dramatic events than the one that I've been through, and that's hard to talk to. Like I sometimes I would be in my own bubble thinking that I had a complicated life, but when I go and talk to someone who've been through the boat trips or the camps and the inhuman situation and all the severe terrible inhuman situation, I feel like, what am I complaining about?
But I think
I go back to that denial when that was before writing the book. So there were more terrible stories than mine.
In your book, I must say, we haven't touched on it very much, is this complex relationship with your family, which is very interesting and in part about traditional Arab values and your life and your choices, and several questions about, are you in touch with your family? I believe you did get to see your mum with the baby. Yes, tell us.
Yeah, I am. I like after I got married, it was only my father who was against this, but I was in touch with my mother and my brothers, and they were all supportive. Then after my father had his stroke, and after a year of visa process, I managed to get a visa to visit them. So they are based in Saudi Arabia, and I managed to get a visa to go there. But he was diagnosed with Alzheimer, and his memory was already fading out. And by the time I managed to get a visa and visit him, I don't think he remembered me, or his memory was in and out. So I can't say fully that we have a great relationship, because I don't know if he fully remembers what happened or not. But we met, and he met my husband, and he told him to look after her. And that for me was the closure, that
a validation, really.
Yeah, a validation, exactly. And I'm still in touch with the rest of the family. And after I got my Irish passport, I managed to go back to Saudi Arabia, and they met my kid. He was 4 years old, and for 4 years they didn't see him, and that kind of always breaks my heart when I bring it up, because they missed 3 birthdays and they missed 3 years of his life, all because of visas. But we met, and we are in a good relationship. And I know my mother is reading the book. I don't know how.
Oh wow!
It will be,
I remember in the book when you finally, you just go and apply for a visa to go to Saudi, and you get one, and this is like what most people do all the time. And for you, this was a novel experience to be able to just go and apply and get what you want with no problems. So,
well, that took a year, that visa. It took a year, actually, the first time. Yeah. But when I got the Irish passport, it was like in 2 seconds. Yeah, that was in 2 seconds when I applied.
Yes, you described waiting for the citizenship letter to come, and the amazing day it came.
Exactly.
And another question is, what's next for you, Suad? Writing or engineering or something else? Or dare I say, just chilling out and enjoying your life, or you're going on to new things?
That's a good question. I'm kind of between both. So right now I work as a data scientist, and I'm doing publicity for the book. I'm thinking about writing another book, and I feel like I'm between the literature world and the engineering world, but I'm finding my heart with the literature and with reading books and with writing stories. I feel it was way more powerful than my work with tech in humanitarian. I feel words are more powerful than tech, because even when I did my master's was around a humanitarian project. I was analyzing the xenophobia in the news using machine learning, but that wasn't as powerful as writing this book to change the narrative and talk about xenophobia or the whole migration and refugee crisis. So I'm between both worlds. Let's see which one will win.
Right. And as you said yourself, choosing engineering as it was actually almost a given a choice which has helped you so much throughout your life. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. I think, I always believe in the power of that degree that I got, the engineering. I love engineering. I love. I switched to data science, which is part of tech, and there is a part of it which is storytelling using data. And I like that part because it kind of mixes the storytelling and the technology and data. So looking into data to be able to tell a story through visualization, through maps or through charts, what is happening or what happened to this data or what kind of patterns do we find. So I find that domain interesting because it's an intersection between storytelling and technology.
I think that we can begin to draw our conversation to a close. If there are no more questions from anyone else at this point, I would just like to say it has been a great pleasure to talk to you and to learn about your experiences. And you have a remarkable story, which I certainly, for one, enjoyed very much and also found very thought-provoking on many levels. There are many things in your book which we have not touched upon, and it's well worth reading, and I would recommend this book to anyone who would like to read it. It is a good read. So thank you very much indeed, Suad, for your time.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks. It's been a pleasure to be here and know more about Berwick. Do I say it correctly? Is it no? Berwick?
Berwick.
Okay. I learned a new word. But that's such
your
a pleasure.
English is excellent. It's excellent. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye, Suad.
Bye.